Welcome to another edition of Downforce Meets here on Downforce Racing with myself, Alex Goldschmidt, and I'm really pleased to have alongside me David Tremayne. David, who has spent his career in motorsport with such as being with Motoring News, obviously The Independent and The Independent on Sunday, and Grand Prix Plus, if you haven't heard of that, which is still, if memory serves me correctly, David, has Joe Saywood very much at the helm of that one.
Not quite. It's a joint effort.
Joint effort.
It was my idea for the mag, and Joe and I run it as equal partners.
Well, that's why
He's just larger than life. And he does most of the work, bless him.
Yes, he's a trooper, is Joe. But also, you've written over 50 books in your career. Obviously, the Jim Clark, The Best of the Best, which was published back in 2018. But we are literally on the week of the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the passing of the uncrowned king of Formula One, the only driver that was posthumously awarded the Formula One World Championship back in 1970, and that was Austria's Jochen Rindt at just the age of 28, passing away in that tragic accident at Monza as Formula One heads there this season for 2020. I've been reading some of the book as we've discussed, but it's a really captivating story about telling the story of Jochen. You know, I remember sort of doing some research and finding out that he liked getting in trouble with the local police, which nearly cost him his race license back in the 60s. But just from your perspective, to have, to read such an enthralling and captivating book, what was the genesis behind it, really, first of all?
Well, I'm a great believer in when you sort of have mountains in your life, if you like little projects that you want to do, it's always a good idea to have the next one. Mm-hmm. For example, when we were involved with Thrust 2 in 83, it was fantastic. We had 3 years building up to getting the land speed record. But then for a lot of guys that were in the team, that was it. That was the high point. And I love having new high points to try and go after. So I'd just done the Lost Generation in 2006, the Williamson Bryce Price book. But even while I was writing that, I was thinking, what am I going to do next? And then I had a chat with Mark Hughes at Haynes, now at Evro, and we decided Jochen was completely underwritten. So we talked about it, and you had Heinz Brüller's book was the only sort of meaningful thing written about him in book form. And we agreed that Jochen would be a great subject.
Yes, I very much agree there, because Jochen passed away, unfortunately, at the tender age of 28. But, 60 starts in Formula One, 6 wins, 13 podiums, 107 career points. And he also went on to, he ran with Nart back in the 60s and won the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I mean, it was crazy back in those days where everyone like, say, Jochen, Sir Jackie Stewart, who provided such a fantastic forward for this book as well, and was very good friends, obviously, in the safety aspect of Formula One in what was a very dangerous time, especially with the likes of Francois Savert and Jochen, amongst others, some of the big profile casualties of what was a very competitive but very dangerous era of the sport.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the fundamentals in doing the book was to talk to Jackie. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember there was a picture of Jackie and Emerson sort of face to face, side by side, sideburns and everything else. And you sort of think, how can they be mates? How can they be mates if they're rivals and fighting each other? And then later, when I got to know Jackie, suddenly found out that just how close the friendship was with Jochen. Super close. The same with, funnily enough, Jackie with Francois. But I found something very inspiring about the fact that these guys could be the best of what they did, and yet still be firmly very respectful of one another and very close. I thought that was a very nice thread on which to kind of kick off the book. Because one of the things about Jochen, and a lot of this is because of his appearance with the sort of squashed nose and everything else, which he claimed, I think it was Jack Brabham he told, or Denny or somebody like that, but he claimed it was a skiing accident when he was 14. Well, if you look at the pics in the book of him with his stepbrother, Huey, it's very clear that he was born that way. But I just think with Jochen, it was the way that he came across during the story. The more I kind of researched things, the less arrogant I found him. I think he could be very arrogant with people he didn't like, but with people he did like, he was an incredibly warm and friendly guy. And I like that fact that it was, for me, I was discovering what he was like the more people I talked to.
I think also one of the other things that Jochen was also very popular. He ran, he was half German, half Austrian through birthright, and ran under the Austrian national flag, but was very popular in his home nation. And he also hosted a monthly television show called Motorama, and then set up a successful exhibition of racing cars in the capital city of Vienna. But also the biggest thing, which we talked, you talked about the friendship between him and Sir Jackie, is the fact that Jochen, until his passing, was heavily involved alongside Jackie, brothers in arms, if you will, to campaign to improve safety within Formula One.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the way Jochen drove, you sort of think he would be one of these guys that just jumps in and gives it death, pounding the car and getting the maximum out of it without a thought of his own safety. And I think that may have been true even as late as 69. But I think the thing that really changed it was that big shunt at Montwick Park in the Spanish Grand Prix when the rear wing failed. And you may remember that he wrote to, this is amazing. He actually wrote a letter to Motoring News and Autosport complaining about wings in general and Lotus in particular. That would be like Max Verstappen writing to us now and saying, well, don't agree with this and this, that Red Bull's doing. It just never happens. But that was a sort of appealing naivety in a way, or just a desire to say exactly what he thought. And of course, you can imagine how that went down with Chapman. But here's Jochen very, very well aware, particularly in 1970 after Bruce's death and then Pierre's, very aware of the tightrope he was walking, which is kind of counter to the image of the super fast hero racing driver that everyone had of him. He was very aware that it could happen. And that's part of the sort of poignancy of his tragedy. He was aware of it, and you just hoped it wasn't going to happen to you.
Yeah, I think also one of the other things there is a particular Austrian that I think does need mentioning in this, and that is Helmut Marko, head of the development program, who was actually a school friend of Jochen's, and they visited the 1961 German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring after he got his first car, which just so happened to be the people's car, the Volkswagen Beetle. And now, Helmut had a Formula One career, obviously had to retire due to, I think it was eyesight troubles, if memory serves me correctly. And now is basically the one that is really looking over what's happening at both Red Bull Racing and also the team formerly known as Toro Rosso, but now AlphaTauri. It was quite funny because my father asked, why have they called it AlphaTauri? It sounded good as Toro Rosso. I said, let me just say one word, Dad, marketing.
Yeah, I don't think it comes across as nicely as Toro Rosso myself, but I love Helmut. I think he's one of my favorite people in the paddock for an awful lot of reasons. I just really like the fact that, again, like Jochen and Nicky, he tells it like it is. And the stories he tells of them as kids, you could see why they got expelled from school together. The road races they used to have in the Beetle, the deal was each friend would get to drive it until he lifted off or made a mistake, and then, okay, stop, somebody else takes over. And then Jochen and Helmut and the guys would race their road cars, say, from Vienna to Graz. And there was no quarter asked or given. Anyone who showed any sensitivity, that was a big no-no. If you had a shunt or an accident or, you spun or whatever, the others left you to figure it out yourself. And I think that's partly where Jochen and both Helmut and Jochen sort of learned how to race. That was where they learned some of their tricks. And Helmut himself was a damn good driver. And he was injured with the first time he had the latest BRM in 72 in France. He was chasing Emerson and Ronnie, and one of them threw a stone up that hit him in the eye and blinded him. And the saddest thing with that is he didn't have a seat fitting. And had he, because the car was late and everything was typical BRM disorganisation, had he been sitting 10 centimetres lower, which he normally would have been, the stone would have gone over his head, and who knows what he might have, he could have been Nicky before Nicky.
Yeah, I think you make a very, very good point there. Obviously, it's been, I think it's been what now, just over a year since Nicky has passed away. Another big man, a well-respected individual who told it like it was whenever he got the opportunity. And I think the term "no BS" was definitely in Nicky's psyche. But such a very, very charismatic individual, but also with going to Will's book where they allowed it air tragedy over in Asia, where Nicky went above and beyond. He had no security. He had no PR team. He went and spoke to every single family that was affected by the tragedy. He had a massive lawsuit with Boeing, went on the simulators and managed to say, well, look, this is the problem. You need to sort it. And it just goes to show that despite the fact that, people from Austria can be very, very, as you said, the way that Jochen was, that with people that he didn't know, they can be very, very upfront, and they call it like they call a spade, and that is one of the endearing characteristics of them as well.
Absolutely, and the thing with Nicky with the plane crash is he discovered that it went into reverse thrust in flight, and he went to Boeing and told them all about that, and they said, "So what are you going to? So what?" kind of thing, and his thing was, "Well, I'm going to publicise it all," and they said, "Well, you're not if you want to get any more planes." And then the argument kind of went on and on and on. And then Nicky said, "Okay, I'm going to take one of your planes and I'm going to fly it over Seattle tomorrow and put it into reverse thrust and show you what happens. Do you want to come along for the ride?" And that was when they finally reached a settlement. But I think that was outstanding what Nicky did. And he'd always said, if it was my fault, if it was my aeroplane, I would shut the airline immediately. And Jochen was exactly the same kind of honourable guy. I mean, the thing I love is British Grand Prix 1969, Jochen and Jackie fighting it out for the lead. But they were swapping places, waving each other past if they could see the other one had got a run on them. And that went on for lap after lap after lap. And I forget how many respective laps each led. But Jackie said they were sometimes passing each other 30 times a lap. And they were still running a lap record speed because they were giving each other enough room. I think that was a perfect sort of duet between two top-line drivers. And Jack Brabham says the same thing. He loved racing Jochen. He was laughing about being interlocking wheels going through Paddock Bend with him and Brown's in 1970, saying I trusted him completely. So he was super quick, but he was also very clean, didn't pull dirty moves on people. And to me, I praise that and I prize it when you get a driver of that standard. Same with Jackie.
I think also one of the phrases that stands out to me personally is when Jackie said, "David is a wonderful writer who has done Jochen great justice in the words that he has chosen to depict a remarkable man and a remarkable career." How much did that mean to you personally when seeing those words from him, considering the amount of time that you spent with Jackie as well to get to know him as an individual? Because he's been in the paddock, I think, pretty much, up until the current situation, reference the pandemic. He was always there with his tartan barber cap on and the tartan trousers with the Rolex shirt on, pretty much every time you saw him. And what a great character and what a great ambassador for Formula One in his own right.
We were talking earlier about how you started, and so I'll put it this way. In 1967, in Autocar, there was a picture of a BRM H16 International Trophy at Silverstone coming right out of the page at you, driven by this bloke called Jackie Stewart. And all these years later, to have Jackie as a friend and somebody who would write something like that, you can imagine what it means. It kind of validates what you do. And the other thing about the book, both on the Lost Generation and the Jochen book, I hate the idea that somebody's running at the front and You know, everyone builds up this hope and this fan base. Everyone gets behind them and they love seeing their respective races that go by and the results, and then suddenly it's done. And they're the one that's left behind, and the sport life just carries on. And I've always found that very difficult to cope with. And I just don't like the idea that these people get forgotten. And they deserve not to be. So it's nice to, you know, whether anyone reads it or not, it's nice just to have done a book that kind of, I hope it does honour them, because that's what it should do. It's kind of warts and all. But, you know, like so many of these people, the overall character outweighs whatever shortcomings they might have had. And I think I ended up really liking Jochen. I never met him. I did see him race at Brands in 1970 in the Race of Champs. But I came to really like him as a person. I thought he was great.
I mean, coming back to the book, which is available now via Evro Publishing, $14.99. It is a fantastic read. I implore all of you out there to give this book a read, because David has done a fantastic job of just crafting an absolute masterpiece. And David, one of the things that I wanted to sort of ask, just to sort of close things off here, what was the most difficult part of the book in terms of, you know, going through all the research, looking at everything back? What was the most difficult part for you as, you know, for constructing the book itself in how it came together?
On a purely practical sense, it was sort of how do we deal with Indy and all that. So I kind of separated that. I wanted Le Mans to stand on its own. That's an awesome story. It's just such a funny story and so offbeat. And talk about being fated to win there. And then obviously the hardest part is when you talk to people like Nina and Jackie about what happened at the end. And it's, I don't know, sometimes you sort of write these books and you might begin by setting the scene close to the tragedy that follows, then you backtrack and then you pick up the tragedy later on. So everyone knows the end result. But even when you're writing, you sometimes almost manage to get yourself so involved that you almost suspend your own knowledge of that finality. And it's hard to do that properly. To do it so that you honor the person and you're as empathic as you can be with the families. That's very difficult. It's like The Lost Generation. That wasn't a trip to Paris writing that. And actually, the Rindt book was a year late because it was supposed to be done in 2007. And emotionally doing The Lost Generation, I kind of burnt myself out for a bit. And then same kind of deal with Jochen. So those things are difficult, but you know, not as difficult for you as it is for the people who are close to him. And that's what you have to do as a writer if you want to do a good book.
Well, David, really, really thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us here on Downforce Racing.
My pleasure. It's good fun to catch up and to meet you.
Yes, exactly. Even though it's virtually face-to-face, but obviously we'll have to make sure that happens in real life once
one day we'll do it properly at a race somewhere, I hope.
Yeah, I think where we can both be spectators and just enjoy the smell of burning fuel and rubber around a racetrack and have a good old gig.
I'll come to a kart race instead. I haven't been to one of them for a long time.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that PFI, Paul Fletcher International, hosts one of the rounds of the Rotax Euro Trophy next season. So I'll make sure.
Do they still give out the little current bun or whatever it is when you sign in?
I don't know. I think normally when you sign in, you normally get your wristbands, and then you have to be told when to go to briefing, when to get your tyres, and when to be there for practice and transponders. It's karting.
It used to be a muffin. That's right. You used to get a muffin when you signed in.
Oh, crikey. Well,
which most of the kids used to throw at each other.
Yeah, but forget conkers. Just throw the muffin at someone's head and see if it pinballs back. You know. But David, thank you very much for your time. And
thanks, Alex. It's really a pleasure.